Hi, welcome to the first, the fine print of 2026. Um, we're very happy to be back. Uh, and I'm going to start off a little differently than I have in the past. I don't want to belabor this point, but I think it needs to be said. Um, After the last podcast of 2025, I did not think I was a very good version of myself. Uh, I reached out to all my fellow panelists that day and eventually got to speak with Ryan, Bruce, and Dennis because I thought I owed everybody an apology. I was rude and a very bad moderator, uh, something I'm not proud of, and so not only did that reflect poorly on me and had adverse consequences to all my panelists, but it was not fair to the viewers as well. So while I apologize to Ryan, I apologize to Bruce, I apologize to Dennis. I have not had the opportunity, and now I'm taking the opportunity to apologize to all those who viewed the content. And the only person I embarrassed was myself. And so yeah, you have. So I now have apologized to everyone, and let's start off to. We don't need to belabor this any further. Well, people can still comment on how awful I am if they want to, but.
Well, can I just say, Jeffrey, I appreciate that, and I myself can express some reluctance or some, regret for how I acted as well, and I'm sure we're looking forward to a great year and appreciate that.
I just add from Alexander Pope's essay on man, to err is human, to forgive is divine. So let's move in the divine area. Move on. Okay.
We love you, Jeffrey, and we've got a band that we put together here, and we're still tuning up. So thank you for helping us go in that direction.
Okay, well, that's all my opening statement today is a short and sweet one. So why don't I there's just so much to talk about. Bruce, why don't you get started?
Yeah, I think in the larger background, I believe Jeffrey and Ryan and Dennis is the President Trump's unbelievable statement to the New York Times boasting, there are no limits on what I can do except my moral conscience, whatever I psychologically feel I'm uncomfortable doing. Namely, stating that he is going to do anything he wants to do. And he added that international law is whatever he says it is, right? So it is about a clear statement. I mean, maybe King Louis XIV was comparable when he said the state, I am the state. But this is a complete statement of an individual who believes he is above the law, he's above the Constitution. He will not let anything stop him other than, an invented, fantasized moral conscience. Now, we know that these statements are not just academic. Mr. Trump acts on them. Most recently, I guess, after murdering over 100 alleged, unproven drug traffickers, low down ones, not Pablo Escobar in Colombia, in the Caribbean and Pacific, in any due process with no evidence that they were engaged in any wrongdoing whatsoever. Then he basically kidnaps the president of Venezuela, calls him a narco terrorist without a trial, as all of his subordinates do the same, convicting him in public opinion before he's even arraigned in New York, and stating that he can do this to any other country, including threatening to do the same in Colombia, in Mexico, in Cuba, in Nigeria, most recently in Iran. He'd go anywhere. There are no limits on what he has openly boasted that he is and is willing to do, right? So this is as clear a statement as you can imagine any president ever saying. that I will commit any impeachable offense I feel like. The only thing that can stop me is myself. And if you don't like it, that's your problem. Now, if that is not an impeachable offense, nothing is. Remember, impeachment is not a criminal proceeding. It's a civil proceeding. It's similar to firing the CEO of a company, Fortune 500. It's basically telling the president, we can no longer entrust the stewardship of our liberties and the rule of law to you. It's what George Mason at the Constitutional Convention said, attempts to subvert the Constitution, attempts are sufficient to impeach. You don't wait until we're already off the cliff to try to scramble up the side of the mountain, right? And this is Trump, and Trump was not being hectored by the New York Times interviewees. He was treated very gently, in my view. And this is what he volunteered on his own. It wasn't like a trick question that he stumbled into. And moreover, it isn't isolated. Remember, shortly before that on NBC News, he said that he doubted that he had to honor his constitutional oath to support, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Earlier, on July 23rd, 2019, he said, then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president. These are words over and over again announcing to all the American people, I am a king. I do whatever I want to do. And the complacency of not only the Democratic Party, but the American people is, to my mind, truly stunning. I go back to my experience, and Dennis probably shared it as well. This is the Saturday Night Massacre. This is October 20th of 1973, when President Nixon, through his chief of staff, Alexander Haig, phoned the Justice Department and said to the Attorney General, the Commander-in-Chief has given you an order to shut down the Watergate Special Prosecutors Force. Not only did Elliot Richardson say no, and William Ruckelshaus said no, you are getting tens of thousands of email. There were telegrams at the time, the forerunners of emails, protesting what had been done. And that was the beginning of the end of Richard Nixon. And I can guarantee you, and I think Dennis will confirm this, it was the public opinion that was demanding that Congress act. It wasn't Congress taking the lead, dragging public opinion along. And this was with regard to a president who in 1972 won 49 out of 50 states, more than 60% of the popular vote, 520 electoral votes, the biggest landslide ever. And he was gone in 18 months because the American people said, no, the rule of law is more important than Richard Nixon. Now, we are at a level far beyond the Nixon impeachable offenses, which were obstructing justice in the Watergate investigation and abusing federal agencies to harass his political enemies. We are way beyond that. Basically, we have the president saying, I kill anybody I want. I shut down free speech to anybody who criticizes me. I do treaties on my own. I run secret government on my own. And the only thing that can stop me is my moral conscience. I mean, you don't even, in my view, you don't even have to have a trial at this stage. There are no disputed facts. You just take Mr. Trump's words on their face. And I'm exceptionally, I would say, distraught, more than disheartened, that the American people and the media don't see this for what it is. But I'd like to hand the baton off to Dennis, because he was there in the trenches at the barricades, as I was at the time of Watergate, and the difference today is amazingly different.
Yeah, well, with Watergate, one of the things we have to remember is that Republicans in the Senate were instrumental in pushing this issue through the Watergate investigation, and that is what started things moving. It was ultimately the Republicans in the Senate who forced Nixon out, and they were responsive to public opinion. I'd like to step back and look at this in a slightly different way, although I have to say, in reflecting on Bruce's discussion about the president's posture, that his own morality determines what he will do and not law. That takes us right back to the island with Epstein. Think about that. Now, how do things become normal, in a society? We've had these discussions before about our reality being socially constructed and culturally affirmed. And the government, the top officials, in this case, the president, has enormous influence to not just set an agenda, but to shape public opinion based on his statements. Except in this case, given the changes that have happened in society and the power of social media, the president has ability to instantly communicate with people many, many times a day in order to keep reinforcing certain points of view. And what happens is there is such a velocity and quantity and velocity of messaging that it's very difficult for anybody to keep up. And essentially, he is unchallenged, at least from institutional structures. And it's the constant repetition that reinforces this messaging. Whether it's true or false objectively doesn't matter. This is what he says. He's the president of the United States. So, he helps to shape this popular culture or even popular prejudice. So you have a weak, a media that's traditional media, institutional media, legacy media, which is has difficulty challenging him, and it becomes even more difficult because the growth of corporations are controlling the media, depend upon government approval for mergers, and he's got them exactly where he wants them in terms of being able to influence messaging in a way that's favorable to him. And then you've got a weak Congress. So when we ask, how in the world can this happen? I've just given you a few of many possibilities to consider. And I'd like to open up a discussion about one other thing. We certainly understand the consequences of the president's statements with respect to foreign policy in ways that are absolutely mind-blowing. But we have to look at domestic policy here. We have an agency with government sanction that's basically become rogue. ICE is something that could have never been contemplated in the America that we know. It's some people would reject any direct comparisons to Gestapo. They're now going door to door. We're back to the knock on the door in America. That comes from the top. The immediate response to the shooting of Renee Good out of the White House, the president, the vice president, and then Secretary Noem is instructive and chilling, because what it does is it talks about the desire to create an alternative narrative that is essentially a cover-up of a murder, and the ability to do so to get people to see things in perceive things in a different way. I mean, people in any event, we see things selectively. We remember things selectively. We forget things selectively. And this concept of selective perception is very powerful with a administration which is determined to sell a version of events which is totally contrary to observable phenomenon. So, are we in trouble here in America? Unfortunately, yes. And the way out is going to require an informed citizenry, and one that is ready to mobilize to challenge this, not just the lies, but to challenge the destruction of our Constitution.
Yeah, right. Great opening, both of you. I mean, I just want to build on both your points. I agree with everything you're saying. First, what you said there at the end about the narrative setting, also with social media, it's important to think about this as kind of it's not just unique to the United States, but it's very, they have more of the influence on the narrative for the most part today as the West for the most part. But remember, like during COVID-19, whatever your thoughts about what happened, remember that before we had any information, or even after Tyler Robinson, and that before we even know what's going on, you get people at the top in the White House grabbing the microphone and yelling what they want you to think before we even know. And that seems to carry through. Your point about social media is so important because on top of what you said, not even just Truth Social, let's not forget the Twitter, Elon Musk kind of network. And it's very clear that you see, mostly rising up like fake AI videos and so on, but Musk and other large influencers just tapping a video and saying, yes, 100%. And that gets 10 million views. And that even if people are looking at it knowing it might be false, it shoves this narrative through over anything else and very much dominates the conversation. And so people with information, people who are more measured, get buried underneath a lot of that. And to your point, it very much does build and build and build to where we're lost trying to get, we don't even know which one to address. There's 17 points on the table and you end up, like you said, getting unchallenged for the most part. I also would point out that I think the reason that you get so little resistance from the establishment Democrat side is because I think they're almost salivating about that power being in their control when this thing swings back around. And so it's hard to, the power structures covet that kind of influence. But the last thing I'd say, off of everything you guys laid out, I would ask just a general point. What is the interest? Like if you're looking at the U.S. government as, any government trying to achieve its ends and convince us of its agendas, why would it do it this way? Left or right? Why would the government come out and be like, we're just going to, to the first point I get, you could argue they're trying to gain that power, normalize it. That point would make sense. But I often ask why Trump would come out and be so brazen, so blatant with things that not even most Republicans want, if you really dig in. I just think it's worth thinking about. There's a lot of possibilities, but it seems as if it is shooting itself in the foot.
Unpack those possibilities. You're onto something.
Well, go ahead, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I've written to all of us, I think this is predictable. I think this is who Trump has been his entire life. Trump has. There's been no distinction between Trump as a person and Trump as a brand and Trump as a business. Okay. The hierarchy in his every business is he and everyone else. Okay. That's how he's operated. He's never demonstrated any capacity of ever behaving as a fiduciary. Okay. He has an authoritarian personality. His whole life has been as a role where he's an authoritarian. He's been in a situation where he doesn't ask anybody permission, that people have to ask him for permission before they do anything, but he doesn't have to ask anyone else for permission. So given the fact that this has established who he is, why is there any surprise that he's being the same person he's been in his entire life and how he's dealt with people? Look, I remember the case, when some analyst out of some small regional firm in New Jersey had commented that they thought one of his hotel Atlantic City properties was going to go bankrupt, and Trump and from what I recall of the story, Trump called up the guy's boss and said, fire this guy. This is all bullshit. And what happened 6 months or something later, they defaulted on their bonds. So this is who he is. He's a bully. He intimidates. They had the incidents of people who were protesting in front of Trump Tower, and then goons went down and beat them. Some indications of did Trump order it or not? Nobody really knows, but is it just coincidental? Is it likely that people who work for Trump were going to do that without his permission? Who knows? So this is who he is. So I don't view this as the U.S. government doing this. I view this as Donald Trump doing it.
Yeah, and adding to what Jeffrey said, I do think that he's right that we're dealing with someone's got a psychological, emotional age of about 3 or 4 years old. He gets an adrenaline high by just beating his chest and playing bully on a playground. Because you're absolutely right, Ryan. Why would an ordinary person go ahead and boast and say, I'm the only one who can check myself. I can do whatever I want. When you're advertising your lawlessness to the whole world, you wouldn't do this unless you got some psychological high internal. I think we're dealing with someone he's a little bit different than a Mussolini or even than a Stalin or a Mao or a Hitler, because this is 100% narcissism. He doesn't believe in anything but himself. Even his hates he doesn't believe in. The other day he said now his immigration, he's xenophobic one day, and then he says he has to do something from the DACA children who entered. Maybe he'll smile at them, because this is all just about narcissism, and he has to be the center of attention 24 hours a day, because I believe he's a very, very fragile personality. He has no philosophical depth whatsoever, and he just needs to be stimulated every day by his assertion of power, to keep himself from being self-destructive. But I think it's wrong to impute any kind of higher rationality to what he's doing than what Jeffrey said. He's just a little kid.
And I also think he's a sociopath. And a tendency of sociopaths are that they're really brilliant in detecting weakness and exploiting it. Mm-hmm. So he sees that nobody is pushing back.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, just look at not just that statement. We got to look at those things. Now we have them investigating Powell, right? Powell didn't quit, so he's got to be investigated. Now he's talking about, I have regrets for not taking the voting machines. Is this now a prognosis for what he's going to do in 2026? He's already signaled the fact that he thought it was a mistake. He didn't do it. Does that mean he's probably not going to repeat that mistake, if it happens this time? Now, if he's only answers to himself, what does it now say about him staying on as president beyond 2028?
Yeah.
Because he's already announced, and he's already said previously, when you're the savior, the rules don't apply to you. So it's not as if this is the first time he's made this is the starkest way he said it, but he's been saying this in different ways over and over again. People just are not listening. So, he's been signaling it. It's like, it's like, let me toy with throwing out a trial balloon and see what happens. And then I keep going because I'm getting no pushback. The reality is nobody's pushing back. I mean, the system that, Madison had hoped would work is ambition checking. Ambition is, he's basically told Congress, you're completely irrelevant, and nobody in Congress wants to represent the institution of Congress.
Yeah.
So they're talking about, let me look at so when I look at these little details, well, let's look at what we can do to prevent him from going into Greenland. I mean, so they want to appear like they're doing something. It's like virtue signaling. We can't be completely silent, so let's do something that we're really going to have no impact on and make a lot of noise, as the expression does, much ado about nothing. So why should he not make these statements? He's the guy who said, I could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue in in broad daylight and get away with it. I mean, so he understands the nature of his support. He understands that his base supports him more than they do the Constitution, more than they support any institution of government. So those people that are faithful and loyal to him, okay, prefer him saying that, than the alternative.
So, I agree with that. I just think that
I think he knows all this.
I agree with that. I agree with the point, but I still argue that the base is not the majority of the conservative movement. And I know we tend to disagree on this, but I think every day we're seeing more and more and more that people are standing up and calling this out at very high levels of influence. It's not just small. There's major people on the conservative, even mainstream Republican side who are going, I didn't vote for this. And there's lines for everybody. But, it's worth reflecting on that, because I think that the issue, I think one of the main things about what all this is, if we're going back to the point of why, and I agree, I think Trump, this is who he is. You read his books, he'll tell you who he is. It's not a secret. It's about people trying to see what they want to see. But the point of why, because I get who he is and so on, but if you believe, like I do, that there's more behind the reality of the election process in general, but that Trump was ultimately chosen for a lot of reasons to be in this position. That's my opinion. That if you think about why, I think it's obvious that he is in many ways kind of dismantling everything this country is. And I don't think that is in the benefit of the government as a structure or Trump as power, because it's very clear that you will eventually lose that power if you continue to push this way, or be shown as the utter authoritarian dictator that you don't. I mean, I think it's always been in the interest of the American government machine to project liberty, democracy, and self. I mean, that's what they always have done. And if you go away from that, I think they lose what's ultimately given them that kind of international support. And so I just think him doing this suggests that there's something else driving all of this, you know? And so that's why I continue to see so many people start to just go, okay, this, I mean, take Kirk or any number of examples. There's a major moment of transition for people like that at this high level where they start to realize there's something else sort of driving what's happening. And they start to go, you know, Epstein Files has been like a breaking moment for so many conservatives out there. I just think it's worth considering that and what might really be driving all that.
But I think Ryan, what you said is very good. And I agree that, I think I would separate out the motivation of Trump, which can be separate from the motivations of his supporters, or some of them. I do think that that Jeffrey is correct, that this is purely narcissism on Trump's motivation. Now, it may well be that at least initially some of his supporters had more than just narcissism of Trump at issue, and they're willing to now separate themselves out. At least initially, a little bit. They're kind of timid on some of the larger issues, especially Marjorie Taylor Greene, and obviously you have Thomas Massey's, and you have others sporadically separating themselves out. But what, to my mind, is disappointing, and maybe it's constitutional illiteracy, they don't understand the only way you're going to get rid of this albatross, if you would, as a euphemism. You have to remove him from office. That's the remedy. It isn't just standing up and saying, I don't like what he's got to do. And this comes back. Impeachment is not a coup d'etat. Impeachment and removal is saying it's like firing the CEO. And Jeffrey, I'm sure you've been involved in firing CEOs. You don't go to Siberia. It's not the French guillotine. Hey, we can't trust this guy with the rule of law with our institutions anymore. And I think it's this, what I call the epidemic of constitutional illiteracy, that doesn't unify, you know, those who are queasy about what Trump is doing and saying. But what do you do next? It's more than just an op-ed piece. You're sitting in Congress. You can introduce an impeachment resolution tomorrow, and you don't need to have any disputed facts. You just rely on what Trump himself has said. You don't need a trial when the guy has already conceded what are impeachable offenses. He not only concedes it, he boasts about it. He puts it on the front page of the New York Times. You know, that's the beginning and end. And then you got to move on. And this is not a coup d'etat, political. I mean, let's assume that Trump left office. So J.D. Vance, well, J.D. Vance is not going to do what Trump did if he's going to be impeached and removed. So the Republicans would still have control of the White House. It wouldn't change the makeup of the Congress. It's not a military coup. This is how civilized people deal with internal, you know, innerness and conflict, you know, in a way that's civilized and doesn't mean having a civil war. And that's what's disappointing, is the ones who are initially trying to separate themselves out from Trump still run away from the I word. The I word is not, you know, it shouldn't be boycotted. You know, it's central to our concept of separation of powers and checks and balances.
Yeah, I think there's, and I'll leave it to Dennis next, but I think there's a lot of noise out there of people saying, you know, they're not happy with it. I don't know how many real conservatives exist anymore. You know, at least those will come out of the closet. You know, so I don't really know. But the reality is he's not being impeached. Nobody's seriously even proposing impeaching, and nobody's talking about defunding any of these activities. So the reality is he's getting away with everything he says, and he's proving himself right, and people are backing down. So there's John Thune, you know, none of the people are sitting really making statements, except for like as Bruce pointed out, you know, MTG and Massey. Other than that, people are just silent. You know, members of Congress. What leadership position? You know, they said they're talking about, well, let's maybe stop him in Greenland. You know, but they're not willing to stop him in Venezuela.
I think they're afraid. I think
You
they're genuinely afraid.
know, I'd like to make an observation here about the larger context that we're looking at. I think we're looking at the presidency as a reality TV. It's like a form of infotainment for people. You have to remember, there's a lot of people that just, you know, spend time in front of their television or, spend time looking at these machines. And what Trump has been able to do is, create a drama, The Apprentice writ large, where he is the central figure of everything that's happening. And that he is the central figure in this great national and international drama. People are constantly riveted to what he does. And we are, this is proof of it, this kind of discussion we're having, but without often thinking about the consequences. He's constantly stirring up emotions among people. The anger that's out there is free floating. It's about a lot of things, including economics. The political system in Washington hasn't responded appropriately so that people will listen to what the president says. And what we are left with is this, as we've seen, the erosion of the office of the presidency and what it means to the Constitution, the illiteracy relating to the Constitution that Bruce talks about has profound implications because people don't even understand what their rights are. They don't understand that the president isn't in charge of the country, that Congress has a role. Congress has helped to reinforce that by its pusillanimous nature, and we're left with the waiting for people to come forward to challenge this. Now, I can tell you right now, if I've been in Congress right now, this is an open and shut case of challenging the executive with an impeachment. It's not even a close question. You could come. I drafted over 40 articles with respect to Bush, based on Iraq, and this administration has gone way beyond the offenses that Bush had, and there it was a carnival of lies. So I'm, I look at this with a fair amount of astonishment, but also an understanding that there are still people out there ready to mobilize. Let us not forget that you could track all across the country hundreds of thousands, even millions of people collectively out in the streets about this murder of Renee Good. The No Kings protests showed, America is starting to move forward to protest. So I think as we know all too often, because of the failure of our institutions, the change comes up from the bottom, from the streets. And we may see more of that. And that may be what starts to move this redolent Congress. I would say that even a podcast like this can be instrumental in getting people to think about exercising their basic rights as citizens, to learn their basic rights as citizens, to learn their First Amendment rights, to go into the streets in a protest, to learn what the limits of state power happen to be with respect to this burgeoning police state without rules. So, hope springs eternal.
Yeah. Well, I think, Dennis, what you underscore is, as you have rights, you have obligations too, even if they're not enforceable in a court of law. If citizens don't feel an obligation to police and be sentinels on our rights and liberties and opposing officials in public life who are abusing their authority, it's not going to happen. That the people who occupy positions of power are there not for philanthropy. They're there because they like power, and you got to push them if they're going to do the right thing. And that means, because everyone has their right to vote, say, we're not going to vote for you. We're going to vote for somebody else if you don't do the right thing. And that comes from the citizens. And say, we saw that at Watergate, and that was the hydraulic pressure that pushed this forward. And Barry Goldwater, you're right, Barry Goldwater, Hugh Scott, John Rhodes, Scott and Barry Goldwater in the Senate went to the president and said, you're going to get convicted. You better leave office. And he did. But they were acting at the behest of their constituents who are calling in, sending telegrams. It all goes back in some sense to Benjamin Franklin after the Constitutional Convention concluded and said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. Understanding that you don't have a republic that operates on cruise control. If you got to do things to keep it. You have to contain and criticize any deviation from the rule of law in our institutions if we're going to keep afloat. And that's just not happening today. And I say I'm truly stunning when it's so open and notorious. This is not a Sherlock Holmes kind of investigation. The guy every day opens his mouth and tells you I have complete contempt for the law. I'm going to do whatever I darn well please. The law is whatever I say it is, Don't tell me there's international law, there are checks and balances. Congress doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. And when he gets no pushback, he feels okay. He can in fact do all these things. It underscores, the wisdom. If you have a bully and you're weak, it will embolden the bully to do more. The only way you stop a bully is to push back. You don't have to be nasty. You don't have to resort to violence. Say you're not going to do that. That's not how we operate in the United States. That's not why we had July 4th, 1776. That is what we're going to stand on. July 4th, 1776. If we have to be the Minutemen at Lexington and Concord, so be it. But we're not going to have their lives and sacrifices to have been in vain. And that's the sum and substance of where we are right now in the United States of America on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution.
And see, this is where the point of lobbying, I think, is a very relevant discussion about what's going on, because we're all expressing how clear this is and how confounding it is that Congress doesn't do much about it, or anything for that matter, besides speaking or discussing different points. I often what we often swirl around is the conversation of education and getting people to rightly so say something, protest, petition your government. What I think is important that I always discuss is opportunism. Is that right now you've got politicians out there that benefit wildly from lobbying from all sorts of aspects. And so there's smaller politicians out there that recognize that they may gain more benefit from yelling the right thing, even though the right thing's not being lobbied for, but they might be out there getting attention for standing up, like Massey right now, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, simply calling out things that are obvious, are getting a waterfall of support. And so it's showing other people, okay, I may get attacked or less lobbying money if I go this direction, but I may gain the support of the people. And I think it's worth just highlighting that for people to see. But I think the point is important to consider that if we're in a position where lobbying has effectively undermined or even, essentially a coup d'etat of our power structure, where these people aren't acting in the interest of the American people. They say that when they get voted for, but ultimately do what that power structure or, whatever the lobbying structure is driving them to do, then we're in a position where there's no real education won't change that. If you get my point, that's no reason not to push that and discuss that and have people stand up. But I think it's about trying to motivate newer people, even people higher up, to recognize the power and the influence they gain by pointing to the right thing. But that's, balancing with how much money they're making every day from many different lobbying groups.
Yeah, but I agree with you that in some sense, self-government or government by the consent of the governed is warped by the money in the system, right? Because we're running basically a semi, if not complete plutocracy, where you get in to see a member of Congress. If they look at the FEC reports, how much did you contribute to my campaign? That's how you get invited to Mar-a-Lago or to the Kennedy, or the Trump Center now, and the former Kennedy Center. And that's an issue that runs on its separate rail, is how do we get money, out of the political system that basically says you actually get more than one vote if you're a billionaire, because you can influence at the highest levels, decisions not based upon popular sentiment, but just you got money to throw in their campaigns. Now, that may take a constitutional amendment is one route to try to overcome Citizens United decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. But another route is one that I think we all agree on here. You got to downsize government. You got to make it less rewarding for these plutocrats to go to the government, because it's smaller. It can't hand out all these monopoly profits. And if you keep having the government bigger and bigger and controlling over whether or not you get a merger, whether or not you can change a plant, like now with this golden shares that we have in Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel, the president decides whether you can open or close a plant. They're going to keep throwing money there. And you have to eliminate the incentive to lobby, saying, hey, you got to make your own mousetrap. You're not going to get profitable simply by by warping and controlling your competitors by regulations or statutes that you lobby Congress to protect you from free competition. But you got to work on both of those routes. But I agree with you in general, Ryan, that it isn't just popular opinion. They have to jump an extra hurdle. They don't have the money. I don't think it's insurmountable, but it means instead of having popular opinion prevailing with 51-49, if you're going to override the money interest, you got to be probably at 66-33 in order to beat that headwind.
Yeah, like and we have to also look at the totality of Trump's actions. He has several people he appointed as ADAs or district attorneys or whatever. The courts have said no, they aren't. Yet they're still signing documents and pretending as they are, even though the courts are. He's completely ignoring the court rulings. So I mean, this is a guy who just says, "I did it. I want this done. It's going to be done. If a court tells me no, I really don't care." So I think with the example of the troops that he pulled out, I think he saw that was less popular. So I don't think he did it because he felt that the courts coerced him. I think he did it because he thought that was a losing issue for him politically. And so I don't think it was. And then he said, and he still might go back in. You never know. And when you think about how to contest him, I on my X account, I now have an X account that I call the Wernick files. I prepared a template of a letter encouraging people to write in, basically telling members of Congress, either you restore your Article 1 powers, or we're going to vote you out and we're not going to give you any money, and if enough people sent that letter, probably Congress would do something about it. If a few million people sent that letter in, maybe they do something about it. But maybe everyone thinks about, gee, if I send that letter in, is my business going to be, am I going to be audited? What's the consequences of my name being on that letter? Okay, now everyone realistically has to fear. I mean, think about what just happened to Exxon. Exxon went to the White House. They say Venezuela is uninvestable. And the next day, what is Trump saying? Or 2 days later, gee, I don't think Exxon's going to have an opportunity to invest in Venezuela. Like it's his decision. Like he has property rights over Venezuela, and who gets to play is up to him. Okay, that's what he's saying. Okay, and people are okay with this. Okay, people are okay because they're convinced the system failed. They prefer Trump to the system that failed them. So I think that's the failure of, the Democrats, is not recognizing that he is getting away with this because the system has failed. People don't believe in them anymore. So people don't see a better alternative. So if they see the choice between Trump and what he's doing, yeah, people say, look, he's winning. He's got these enemies scared. He's doing this thing. I'm proud to be an American again. We're kicking the shit out of people. We're bombing them. This makes me feel great. Okay, so this feels better than the stalemate in Congress that can't agree to anything, and that's owned by the biggest corporations, and the biggest lobbying groups. So our government has gotten so corrupted that people have lost faith in it, and then when people have to sit back and say, well, Trump lies about the little things, but he's honest about the substance. So Congress, is dishonest about the substance, but is honest about the details, So I can understand these arguments, on why people would find, why people can find Trump appealing, and why he's more appealing than the alternative that's been so corrupted, because I can understand it doesn't mean I accept it. It doesn't mean I like it, but we have to, but the way to combat it, and I think that's what we're trying to talk about, is to not really, the problem is not that Trump says these things. The problem is that we've become indifferent to anyone saying these things. So that's the failure in us, and that's a failure that maybe has been reinforced by the fact that this uniparty system has caused us to have so little faith in government that the answer is somebody who's an outsider, who's not really part of the uniparty system, who becomes above the uniparty system, and he becomes the state. So like Hitler did, like Mussolini did, they came when people, institutions had no credibility, and people believed more in them, and they started saying, I believe in you, so I'll give you, more and more power. So
Let me interject, Jeffrey. I agree with everything you say, but I would add an additional point in terms of the failure. And I think it's not necessarily they agree with Trump, but the alternative leadership is so weak and uh, and unimaginative and illiterate. You're choosing the old saying, you can't beat something with nothing, right? And kind of where we are. I mean, Trump, whatever else he is, he's something, stands for something. The Democrats or the alternatives are just zeros out there. I mean, so you could see somebody say, okay, well, I disagree with Trump on X, Y, Z, but who am I going to vote for otherwise? Who else is out there with a leadership role? They all have ulterior motives. Most of them are illiterate. They're not like Dennis, who actually understand the Constitution and understand institutionally why we're going to destroy the country for our posterity, not just for ourselves. They're comfortable. They're complacent. Just think right now, we have 4 living former presidents of the United States. We have H.W. Bush, not H, just W. Bush, and we have Clinton, and we have Obama, and we have Biden. And they're doing nothing, I said, even figure they could develop an impeachment war room, in probably with 3 telephone calls, but do it. You have a Republican side with Bush say, yeah, we got to save the system. We were there, and they can testify that no, our presidencies were not intended, to be kingships. Nothing, zero.
They all, I think they were all aware that if they attempted to do anything that was credible in nature, that they would be the next ones getting subpoenaed, right, like powerless.
Well, so, some of those was, but remember, some of those who got subpoenaed, and maybe Powell. We know that we have the former FBI director and Letitia James. They're standing up. They're fighting back. They're winning it. So there's no doubt. I'm not trying to suggest, Jeffrey, you're wrong in having them have a fear. Okay, I maybe could get a subpoena because it's very difficult to stop a subpoena before you can make a motion to quash it. But I go back, the 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence, they signed their death warrants. They took risks for unalienable rights. To worry about a subpoena seems little small compared to risking your entire life.
I also think, though, that that there's more coordination than we realize of the same kind of idea that's about the larger power. I think it's easy to point out. For example, in Trump's administration, Rubio and Trump hate each other. I think Vance and Trump hate each other too. I think at the end of the day, if you look at past discussions, it's pretty clear about what they said about each other. But they're willing to work together to gain more power, and I think it's the same kind of idea with this larger structure. But I think it's worth going back to the point I've made in the past that, there's an engineered problem here, where you create a situation where, like Jeffrey made an excellent point, that our system is so corrupt and crumble, everything is breaking down, nothing's working right. Largely, I think that's part, whether it was happening organically or not, it's been harnessed and used to drive us into accepting what Trump, or at least trying to, is as the counterbalance to how broken it is over here, or Kamala would have been worse. It's an engineered kind of binary. But I think what's interesting when you look at what Trump said, and this is where I come back to the point of just, I really hope that I'm right in the case of where that majority, even if it's 51-49, because the alternative is that there's more dishonest people, which scares me. But look at what Trump said in the beginning. No more wars, right? Smaller government, less spending. I mean, if you're an honest person, you can clearly see, it's self-evident that that's the opposite of what's happening. So it's confounding to think about people who would go, yay, I want those things, and really want them, and then be okay cheering the guy who does the exact opposite for whatever reason. That's where I think this is starting to change, and then I go back to, why? Why would you be so blatant about screwing over your own people? And these are questions we should be asking. But I think you may be right, that the argument stands that what he's doing at least is something, and what that side would have been worse. But I would argue one last thing, that I don't think that he stands for something. If you look at that, he yells things and then does the opposite. That pretty much means you stand for nothing. But I agree with your point, though.
No. I mean, I want to reinforce, just as one example, the same time he screams and yells, well, Maduro's narco-terrorists, we got to stop these drug traffickers because they're killing hundreds of thousands of Americans every year.
Oh, shoot. Right, when he was making his point.
If I could have the privilege of finishing Bruce's sentence. At the same time, he pardons the former president of Honduras, who probably, who was responsible for one of the largest shipments of drugs into the United States. So the contradictions are there. What I think is important about our approach, not just today, but in all of these discussions, is that we distinguish the difference between a clinical analysis and an autopsy. We're not dead yet, but we certainly can see how dangerous this moment is. How it was lest we forget, it was the Democrats who opened the door for Trump by failure to deliver on the kinds of economic concerns and address the economic concerns of the American people. And why didn't that happen? Well, there's a number of reasons. One of which is that the Democratic Party walks in lockstep with most of the same corporations that the Republicans do. I mean, a core issue here is not just campaign funding, it's the infrastructure that was set up for campaign funding of both political parties, with decisions like Buckley versus Vallejo and Citizens United, money equals free speech. Then the parties just went like voracious animals to the trough to eat out of the same place, both parties. And so the policies became ever more, differences became ever more blurred. And this also relates to the incapacitation of the Democrats. So, we're this is obviously a moment, an inflection point in the history of our country, where interesting that it happens at year 250 of our independence. But how do we reclaim the spirit of independence? I think we see little glimmers of that, where people are out in the streets and protesting peacefully. So the people, still, this goes back to Bruce and I talked about this, perhaps teach-ins, or, certainly going out to the people and encouraging these kinds of discussions. Bruce, I took the liberty of finishing your sentence about the Honduran president getting pardoned. So, but back to you, Bruce.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying that shows that Mr. Trump doesn't believe in anything other than he feels that he has an impulse to do something and he can get away with it. And he gets an adrenaline high from that. I mean, okay, he goes into Venezuela one day. He's threatening to go into Bogota, Colombia the next. Then he makes a phone call with the president of Colombia. He says, "Hey, now we're great friends, and we're gonna get along wonderfully." And the next day he could bomb Colombia. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to anything that he does, other than it gives him a sense of power that he can act in such an irrational way, and there's no pushback.
Something I just want to make this point, and then I'm going to have to leave after my customary hour. I think we need to keep our eye on the military, because I don't think the Joint Chiefs are going to automatically go along with Trump's orders if they think they're illegal. This is why this Hegseth is pushing back so furiously on Mark Kelly, because it's doing that as a warning to the people that are in the hierarchy of the Pentagon. Look, you don't become, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Bruce, or anybody else, Jeffrey or Ryan, but you actually don't become the commander in chief unless there's a declared war. I mean, according to the Constitution.
Right.
And so there is a discussion at the level of the Joint Chiefs about, if this guy gives us an order to go into Greenland without the approval of Congress, is that illegal? I mean, they're really having these discussions. And remember when Hegseth hauled in the military from all over the world for a lecture, okay, that they really didn't need. He may have errantly set the stage for a resistance, and there are people who are concerned about the legality of what's going on. So I just wanted to throw that out for the group's consideration.
I'd like to
I
comment
think
on.
that's, I know. And Dennis, I could just interject and then take it over, Jeffrey. But
Sure.
I think also it seems puzzling why Trump has not invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807 in order to go into these cities, which is an easier barrier than the other statutes he relied upon. And remember his first term, where the Defense Department was saying, no, do not, this is not anything that requires the military. They are not conditions that justify the Insurrection Act. And Trump backed down. He didn't invoke it, right? And even although he got rid of the Secretary of Defense, but even the successor didn't have the credibility to enable Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act. And basically that means that he can go ahead and use the military for law enforcement purposes. It'll militarize civilian law enforcement. He hasn't done that. He's kind of flirted with it from time to time. And it may well be, Dennis, that it's because the conversations that you're anticipating are occurring, and he's worried that not only would they not go into Greenland, but they wouldn't respond to his orders under the Insurrection Act.
Well, I want to thank everyone for giving me the chance to participate in this discussion. I look forward to seeing all of you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
But I'd be interested, Jeffrey and Ryan, what do you think? Why hasn't he invoked the Insurrection Act? Is he worried that he'd get the same reaction as he got the first time around?
I'd like to make several comments.
Just one quick one. I would just argue that, like I said before, that ultimately it's because that I don't think he feels the larger group, the majority does not support that move. I would argue. I don't think so. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, one is, I want to cover a couple of things. One, with respect to Trump again and his motivations, and his, maybe running on one platform and then doing another platform. I took the time to listen to the interviews that Bob Woodward did with Trump. It's about 12 hours interviews. It was made into a book and an audio book. I listened to the audio book because I wanted to hear the conversation. These were unfiltered conversations. So these were not censored or anything like that. This is really the actual conversations, uninterrupted, unfiltered. Only during a couple of times did Woodward in the audio book stop to give a little bit of context, but ultimately there was no editing, no excerpting of these 12 hours of conversations. Okay. What's reinforced in 12 hours of conversations is Trump saying the same thing over and over again. Because Woodward would say, do you have a plan about this? Do you have a plan about that? What about COVID? What about this? So he's asking all these questions about Trump's plans. And Trump comes back and says the same thing. Well, and then he says, what do your advisors tell you? And everything like that. And Trump comes up with the same answer. He repeats over and over again. I am a genius on a level that nobody can comprehend. I do not plan. I rely upon my instincts. Okay. I got better instincts than any other human being. The administration is all me. People come in his office. They tell me a whole bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really all noise and all irrelevant. Everything I do is a function of my instincts. I don't need a plan. I got instincts beyond the level of any human being could comprehend. So when you listen to him talk, because you're not only hearing his words, you're hearing him how he says it. Okay, I'm not in the room, so I don't get to see it, but I get to listen. So you're listening to the conversation they had, and you're listening to 12 hours of conversations, about 12 hours of conversations. Okay, I listened to the whole thing. So it took me 2 or 3 days, but I went through it to listen to everything. And I'm listening to his choice of words. I'm listening to how he says things. I'm listening to how repetitive he is. Okay, and in the end, that's him. So when you talk about what he says one day, Yeah, his instincts change. He reads the room, he reads the circumstances, and he adapts according to his instincts. That's why he can never say he has a plan, because he doesn't really have a plan. And he tells you in these interviews, I don't plan. I just react to my instincts, and my instincts are better than anyone's plan. So this is who he is. So you don't look for consistency, because there isn't consistency, because there is no plan. There's a trust that he has instincts, and he has supernatural instincts. He has instincts on a multiple dimension that no human being can comprehend. That's what he believes. Okay. I heard him say it over and over and over and over again. That is who he is. That's what he believes. Okay. That's his impression of himself. Okay. That nobody is his peer. Nobody comes close to being his peer. Even when he's asked about the people, who are the good people on your team? They're shit. Okay. Really, it's all me. It's all me. Okay. I got some guys around me. They're not so bad. Who are they? Well, I don't really know their names, but some are not so bad. Okay. But at the end, it's all me. He gets back to the same thing. Why are you talking about them? He all gets back to Woodward. Why are you even mentioning? Why are you even asking? They're so irrelevant. Okay. They're so irrelevant. Why even mention them in a conversation? It's all me, all me, all me, my instincts. I am just too far beyond superior to your ability in your pea brain to understand me, and the whole planet cannot understand me. Okay. So my instincts. Okay. So that's why you can assume no predictability, no certainty, because he has no plan. He has his absolute faith in his instincts. Okay. And his instincts change. And so as his instincts change, however they change, he doesn't feel bound by whatever his instincts were yesterday or what they'll be tomorrow. So I think that's how you can explain some of this stuff, after listening to him. So that's my sense of him. With respect to the military and Dennis's comment, okay, in my opinion, it's really pretty simple. The military is not a private army. Okay. As Dennis said, it's really, Constitution is pretty simple. The president can't use the military until Congress authorizes it, which means that everything that the military has done without congressional authorization is illegal. Okay. But the problem is they've been doing illegal shit for a long time. So of course, Trump has the same expectation that he could get away with doing illegal shit that every other president has got away with doing illegal shit. So it's become, de facto legal. It's not de jure legal, but it's de facto legal. And Trump expects he should have the same perks and privileges every other president has had. And Trump supporters then could question, why were you so silent when Obama did it, when Clinton did it, when Bush did it? Why were you so quiet when all these people, when Biden did it? Why are you so quiet then? And why are you saying something now? So, and to some extent, to a great extent, that's a legitimate case to make. It is.
But everything we know, Jeffrey and Ryan, they're matters of degree. I agree with you. I mean, remember in Watergate, the Secretary of Defense was so worried about Nixon's intoxication, he gave orders to the Joint Chiefs: you do not respond to any order from the White House unless I approve it. And then we had, even at the tail end of Trump's first term, that the Chief of Staff Miley was talking, saying to the Chinese aide, we're not going to go to war with you, even if Trump tries to stay in office by provoking a war. So you did have some little bit of a resistance there. But the fact is that despite, I would agree, you can go back to Harry Truman's illegal police action in Korea without any congressional authority, that presidents have abused their power. And oftentimes nothing's happened to them, certainly not like impeachment for abusing the war power. But you got to draw the line at some point. It's kind of like saying, okay, if somebody got away with 50 murders, do you just ignore the 51st one because he's escaped it so many times? Right. Well, in some degree, you should say, well, listen, you cared about equality, and so just ignore the ones going future. Well, I think it's better to have some justice than no justice at all, is my view. Is it unfair a little bit? Yeah. I remember in Nixon's impeachment, before he resigned, he kept complaining that LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, did a lot worse things than he did. He was doing, bugs on Martin Luther King, and he was using a government FCC to make his wife rich and doing all sorts of lies, the Pentagon Papers. Okay. And so he said, how come you're going after me? And to some degree, he was right. But the people said, wait, it doesn't really matter. Lyndon Johnson is gone. He's in his grave. And that doesn't mean that we're going to tolerate from you doing even at a higher level than Johnson just because he didn't get proper justice. That's the way to respond. But I would agree. We have to acknowledge that a lot of people at the highest level have gotten away with first degree murder. But hey, let's stop at some point and even acknowledge it's a little bit uneven, except, yeah, it is a little bit unjust, but it's better than doing nothing at all and letting the whole republic be destroyed.
Yeah, the way to engage this is these are two separate conversations. Both are valid, but they're not even meant to be over. Clearly you can argue that there's a dishonesty, a one-sided, whatever you want to call it, of not going after past issues, and even arguing, you could still retroactively go off some of them. They're still alive. But to your both point is that you have to the logic is like saying that because we ignored that first one, that murder no longer matters forever. It's just illogical, So clearly it's a manipulation meant to undermine that, or a team sport politics kind of play to act, defend your guy, even though it's a criminal act. But it's a valid point because it does happen every single time, and we're seeing it right now.
Yeah.
And Ryan, another point to think about. In the beginning of the administration, what do we start off with? Doggy mania. We're going to cut $2 trillion from the budget. Doggy mania. Okay, right? We're going to cut everything, and nothing's sacred. We're going to cut everything. Okay, doggy mania. Now, what nobody talks about is spending is like 8% higher than it was the last year under Biden. So not only did we not cut spending, grew spending. Elon Musk is saying nothing. So, so clearly, doggy mania, completely failed. Trump embraced doggy mania in the beginning. And now what is he talking about? He's talking about a defense budget going to $1.5 trillion. Can you think about, now, if you think about $1.5 trillion, can you think about how Palantir is salivating now? Can you think about that whole industry related to surveillance is salivating now? The military-industrial complex, how they're salivating now. Now think about how much of them want to see Trump continue to be in power if he's going to spend $1.5 trillion on military spending, coming up with all these weapons, that maybe some of them will never ever be implemented. But the point is they'll get to spend a lot of money, doing R&D and developing stuff, and think about all the surveillance that will be involved, and how his friends that now have some control over the media, like Ellison and they've been very out. If you think about Palantir and Ellison, these people, they've already talked about the surveillance society they'd love to see. So,
the funny point really quickly, if you asked the Republicans right now during Biden's administration what represented the deep state, it would have been all of that, and now it doesn't matter because Trump's doing it. It's just a humorous hypocrisy.
No, but it goes, but I think it's even more serious maybe, or complete than what you've suggested, Jeffrey and Ryan. And that is, the Congress hasn't pushed. The Congress even puts even more money out. I can guarantee you, what Trump proposes, Congress will throw more money at it, right? Because the Congress itself, the whole culture, has embraced this military-industrial empire attitude. And it's you don't even have debates. Okay, you'll have, and I believe we should have debates over SNAP and some of the social spending. And you argue about whether we should be spending money to support abortion. But we're talking about the military. No debate at all. A complete silence. It's one-way ratchet up. And that is, we have lost our soul. We began as a country that made our glory liberty and the march of the mind. We've thrown that away and said, no, we're going to have manifest destiny. We're God's new chosen people. We're going to rule the world, even if it means we throw liberty out the window. And that's basically what has happened to the United States of America. I mean, we need to go back to the idea that when everyone gets to march to their own drummer, they get to develop their faculties, they be law-abiding, they work hard, they're industrious. That by itself is great. Not whether we're running around in search of monsters to destroy, go into Greenland one day, go into Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, Cuba, get this juvenile adrenaline high by saying we're number one, whatever the heck that means. I mean, this is like running a government, like a football team. The Green Bay Packers beat the Detroit Lions and everyone jumps up and down. No, politics is not a football game. Politics at its best is making, to the extent we can, everybody a winner. We want everybody to have these opportunities, and we encourage everyone to be accessed. We don't want any losers. And this is a stupid analogy. It's a contact sport. Politics is not a sport. It's the challenge of using our brains to try to develop our faculties and work with human nature. So life is pleasant for everybody and everybody has dignity. It has nothing to do with sports and Tom Brady or these other people. We got to get away from that ridiculous, silly complex.
Well, here's why that's real. This is what when I say team sport politics, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And it's actually very crafty when you think about why, you watch a football game or any sport, let's just say hypothetically in football, the person didn't actually get in the end zone, but you hope the ref rules for him and he does, oh, we got it, even though it didn't really happen. That's the way people look at politics today. And it's very open, and you root for your team, and I've seen what I would consider somewhat honest people knowingly lie about what happened because, like we said before, because, Trump's better than that side. So they rationalize being dishonest because they feel it's a greater good or whatever it is. That's team sport politics, and it is taken over this country.
Oh, yeah. It's another form of the ends justify the means.
Yes.
Okay. We got a good end, so we'll slash and burn. It's a variation of Vietnam. We had to destroy the village to save it. Think about that. You had to destroy the village to save it. Hey, you can't have two things. And it's crazy. You cannot, the system can't work with the ends justify the means, because the means are the ends. The means are sacred. The separation of powers, the rule of law is sacred. Even if it occasionally means O.J. Simpson gets off his criminal trial, we don't abandon due process and right to jury trial. We stick with the process because in the long run, it's our deliverance from being barbarians and going back to the Neanderthals. As simple as that. But you need a certain level of education to understand process. It isn't something that at age 1. And we've totally broken the educational system down. People aren't taught to think critically. They don't understand institutions. They don't understand, the Constitution or any of that. And if we don't provide that as part of the obligation of growing up as a citizen, not only in the schools, but in the home, I don't know where we go, because they're not going to have people who really understand what a republic is.
Well, I think a perfect illustration of that, this issue is the case of this was it Good in Minnesota?
Renee Good, yeah.
Good. Now, why is that? You look at the video. I can understand someone defending Ross. I guess Ross is the shooter, by saying Ross might have felt his life a threat. But looking at the video, people who said she was attempting to run him over, I just don't see how watching the video you can come to that conclusion.
Right.
And nobody can look at the context. Let's think about let's try and be fair and look about the context. We have stories that have been proven that citizens have been picked up and sent to El Salvador or other locations, okay, without due process. Here you have this burly guy walking over, yelling at her, "Get the fuck out of the car," okay? Aggressively grabbing the handle, right? That's accurate, right?
With conflicting direction, by the way.
Yes,
People saying back up, go forward, all at the same time.
So who's to say she was not scared, okay, of somebody coming with that attitude? What was his tone? What was his attitude, okay? Was the tone, "Hi, I'm here. Let's have a conversation. You're blocking. Please, let's have a decent conversation among two human beings," or "Get the fuck out of the car," and grabbing it, okay? Aggressive, okay? So she might have got scared and she wants to pull off. The other guy's in the angle there, and she tries to avoid him, okay? That seems to be pretty clear, okay? I don't see how anyone who really is fair can look at that. This is how unreliable now eyewitness testimony could be, because people see just what they want to see. Okay, going back to the point that you made, Ryan, is that people just want to see what they want to see. Okay, and then they'll justify it and they'll lie about it. Okay, so you have to choose sides. You can't just say she was a woman who was scared, trying to get out of a circumstance. Okay, he was in the wrong place, and maybe he legitimately felt that he was going to get run over by her, Okay. But why was his instincts to shoot? Why wasn't his instincts to jump out of the way? Okay. So, these are questions that just need to be asked. So why am I quick to calling him a murderer? No, I'm not. Okay. Do I think she attempted murder on him? That's what they accused her of. They accused her of being a murderer, an attempted murderer, and a terrorist. Okay. That's what she was accused of. I don't know any reasonable person really wasn't to say about us as people that people are condemning her. Okay. People believe she really deserved what she got. I think a lot of people are happy saying, gee, this is what should happen to more of these protesters who stop ICE from doing their job. Maybe if a few more of them got shot, less people would be protesting. This is our society today.
That's the threat.
How sick is that?
And I think Jeffrey and Ryan, I would make a supplementary point here, and that is, I don't think that they see, what they want to see. I think they know the truth and knowingly lie.
I agree.
They know they're lying, but they feel it's justified. As we were saying, the ends justify the means. So we'll lie about it, no matter what the evidence is. They lie about it even to federal judges who get angry because they live in a fantasy world where they try to make believe that the world fits into their simple model, the good guys and the bad guys. And therefore, no matter what facts and whatever they see, they will stick to the narrative. You just we never admit ever doing anything wrong, period. So that's the marching orders. You can't ever say that the other side has any merit to it. And that's dangerous stuff because we're no longer then engaged in any kind of civilized dialogue and trying to get at facts. It doesn't matter what the facts are, because if the facts don't fit our narrative, the narrative wins, and the hell with the facts. And you cannot have a rule of law in that circumstance.
I mean, I agree with you, Bruce. And I would even probably say, I would argue that's probably more, hopefully not, than not. But it's both, really. I mean, I think Jeffrey's point is valid, that I think there are people that, it may be even like a mixed bag where it's like willful ignorance, where you make the decision that person was at risk and you just run with that. I mean, to the point you made, Jeffrey, I mean, this is what I said when I covered this on the show. This is so frustrating. This is self-evident. You can look at the information and you can clearly see that at the very least, they're misrepresenting it. I mean, for crying out loud, Nome came out and said they were stuck in the snow and they ran up and surrounded them and they had to defend themselves. Everyone, I mean, she got confronted with that on CNN and she just pushed over it and acted like it was correct. That's not true. Nobody's making that argument now. So it's so frustrating, the dishonesty at the core. But to your point, I mean, there is a valid discussion to be had about split-second decisions as authority and, not knowing what's going to happen. I mean, that is a valid point to be made. But I would still argue, to your point as well, Jeffrey, that the shooting in that response is a training reality. And that's something that doesn't make sense with what we pretend serve and protect is supposed to be. But at the end of the day, I think it's very obvious what this was. A person who was protesting, observing rather, and whether even if you want to argue a traffic violation of that dynamic, that does not go to the extent that, the level to which they were enforcing. There was conflicting direction and she didn't know what's going on. She's concerned. They know what's going, and remember, as we've talked about offline here, she said, the last thing she said is don't know whatever, something, dude, I'm not mad at you. Something like that. And then turns the wheel and tries to take off. And on top of that, I just went over this in a recent show. I can prove 4 times. I think the Wall Street Journal pointed out even more. 4 times I can prove that these ICE agents, or not these specific ones, possibly, but ICE enforcement have opened fire, in some cases shot U.S. citizens, lied about being run over, and that came out in court. 4 times I can prove that. On top of the one that I think we discussed on the show, where the guy they lied about the woman having a gun. They shot open fire on the car. So, miraculously, she survived. And the guy brags in their internal chat that went out, 7 shots, 5 holes. And he starts bragging about it. Now, this woman didn't have a gun. They actually rammed her, got out of the car, opened fire, and then made up the entire story. And that came out in court. And now we're talking about this situation. I mean, it's obvious what this is if people are engaging with the facts, correctly. But that's not to say that we should, act like the guy wouldn't have some valid position to respond in certain circumstances, because it always gets hyperbolic. But I'm just very worried about where this goes. A U.S. citizen was killed in the street for an illegal, I mean, they're not identifying themselves. They're not presenting warrants. I mean, none of this is legitimate. And yet we're in the minutia of, I mean, there are people out there calling her names, acting like she should have, like you said, Jeffrey, should have been killed. There's now a GoFundMe for the cop. I mean, just the whole thing is
$250,000. I read.
Yeah, but I'm actually gonna have to
$250,000 for
jump
the
off
cop.
as well, guys. I
The cop is
apologize,
the
but
victim.
this is
The cop
great.
is
I
the
really
victim.
enjoyed the conversation today. I've more than usual, by the way. So appreciate you both.
And just for the audience background
Mhm.
here, I mean, the United States Supreme Court has held that under the 8th Amendment and 4th Amendment, you can use lethal force in trying to apprehend a fleeing felon if you have reasonable cause to believe that the felon would create an imminent danger to others, right? If they're permitted to escape. Now, when you shoot somebody in a moving vehicle, you yourself are creating the threat of imminent harm because the vehicle's not going to be driven by anybody. They're dead. You shot them. And that vehicle is moving. It could kill other people. And there was no indication that this lady was an imminent threat, assuming that she had committed a felony, which is hard for me to understand at all. So you ask, who's training these people?
Exactly.
This is
47 days apparently. If they're
this
training.
is not. This is not high energy physics. It's pretty straightforward. You can only use deadly force if you feel there's an imminent threat, physical harm to some third party.
The second question is, it's not only who's training them, what are they being trained?
Yeah.
I mean, so they might be being trained to do this. You don't know. I'm not accusing that they are, but I'm saying it's a possibility that this is what they could be trained to do.
Yeah.
So
I think what we were saying was just the time frame. I regarding who's training them, we haven't gotten into that, but that's a valid point because there's obvious discussion to be had. But 47 days down from, I mean, that's insane to me that you're bringing on bounty hunters and people that, I mean, there's points to be made about some of these people who can barely read and write. There's been articles that, have broken down their actual background. It's obvious on top of that, as we didn't get into, I am gonna have to break off here, but the ideological push. This guy was what he said, calling her names, the idea that you're being driven in a position like ideologically to hate people who are out there in their own neighborhood, as Trump calls her professional agitator. Her neighbor was out there watching her die. It's just overwhelming what's happening. But again, I will argue that I think most people out there, many of which are terrified to say anything about it, as we discussed today, are unhappy with this. Understand that this is not in any way what Trump was originally promising. And I think we just have to reflect on what that number really is. I personally think it's the majority. I hope so.
And I would like whoever called her, that was hauled on tape afterwards, calling her a fucking bitch. They should come out and say who they are, who said that, because that was said after she was shot. Okay, that those words came out after the gunshots came in, and there also needs to be an explanation on why, when somebody identified themselves as a medical doctor, why they were not given access to her. Okay, so there should be analysis about how long it took for the car to be there, for finally somebody of ICE to call 911. How much time passed?
It could be that she could have been saved in that time frame. She could have lost her life, right? But I think I got to break off, guys. Great conversation today.
Yeah, and the last thing that
thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think that what's important here is to understand what the vetting process is for hiring new ICE agents, because they're out there advertising, trying to hire thousands of new agents, compared to the vetting because they say they're really, really, really concerned that they don't want anybody, armed or in the country that hasn't been vetted because they're extremists. All the vetting now that's done with any refugee who comes in. But my guess is that the vetting is almost non-existent. They put an advertising out, you want to work for ICE? Okay. They don't have any screening to try to keep out the sociopaths or the ones who are likely to do what we saw with Renee Good.
Yeah, I contend that, I think it's, we have this issue of, that the federal government, is in disputes between federal government, state and local government on on many issues, the federal government prevails. Yeah. So, but I think if you had a conversation with James Madison now, and James Madison said, in your design, did you ever contemplate that the government would create a Department of Homeland Security, that they would go into all these neighborhoods, hunting all these people down to do a mass deportation program, that they'd be hunting people down that they don't even have probable cause, that they'd have the lowest element, maybe no cause whatsoever, and just let them go and round people up. Is this an issue that you think that supersedes the state's rights ability? This is local law enforcement issue, and should this preempt local law enforcement? I do not believe it. I do not believe in the constitutional design that Madison had this in mind, that basically you could get, because to me, I view this as an invading army, an occupying force, against the communities. If the community wants it, that's one thing, but they should get the permission of communities, unless they have specific warrants for people committing federal fines. That's all they should be doing, is executing warrants. But this broad scale mass deportation program going into communities where the local government doesn't want it, the communities don't want it, nobody seems to want it except them. That's an invitation for conflict. How can anyone think that that's not a bad situation? Okay, it's a horrible situation. So they know it is, and they're inviting this conflict because they know that's not sustainable. You can't send people in to where they want to go and not have this be the outcome of it, and claim that this is what Madison's design intended to be. How could the Supreme Court really validate this?
Yeah, well, we don't know, but we can't rely upon the Supreme Court. It's either up to Congress and we the people in impeachment, or we're not going to survive.
What do you think about my logic of my argument?
No, well, that's true, but I think that the only thing that I would add is you got to push back forward. If you ask James Madison, he said he couldn't believe that a president who is not executing the law as he's obligated under Article 2 wouldn't have been impeached and removed from office, so that the locals wouldn't be confronting that dilemma. I mean, it was Madison who said the very first Congress, a president who fails to superintend his subordinates can be impeached and removed for that irresponsibility. So I think Madison say we're never even going to get to that situation because a president isn't going to be able to survive, exhibiting such abuse of authority. And that's where all roads in my judgment lead back to impeachment. It's the only constitutional remedy we have.
But again, I go back to the question I ask you over and over again. It's kind of rhetorical. It's how can all these members who claim to be their public meaning originalists justify this behavior? How could they say this is what James Madison had in mind?
Yeah. And remember, because these are James Madison, Jefferson, White, these are the originalists of the originalists. That's originalism on steroids, is listening to them because they were present at the creation. And so when you reject the Madisonian, Jeffersonian, Washingtonian understanding, you are not an originalist. You're an anti-originalist, because they were the ones who were there and wrote the document and sacrificed for it.
So, Bruce, what are your final words for today?
Well, all I can say is you all of our audience, stay engaged. We're dealing in a situation that's very perilous. We don't know whether we're going to be in another country in another 24 hours, what's going to happen. I think, Jeffrey, you're listening to the 12-hour shows that this guy totally operates on instinct, and his instinct, and I'm told myself with people who deal with Trump, that he changes his mind every 24 hours, sometimes 12. He gives out one assignment one day and then the opposite assignment the next day. So we need to be alert and don't get numbed by these changes. Stay active. That's what self-government is about. Your dignity as an individual citizen is the highest honor, in a self-governing land. And we got to try. I mean, we may not succeed. We may end up back with something equivalent to monarchy. But the only thing that posterity will not forgive us for is failing to try.
Hear for those words.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And thank you to everyone that has participated in this conversation. And again, welcome to 2026. And let's do what all we can together, to make this a better year. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.